Can I start?
Yeah.
A very good afternoon, everyone. This is Ms. Indrakshi Bhattacharya from the BFSI Board ICMAI. Welcome all today in the webinar organized by the Banking, Financial Services and Insurance Board of the Institute of Cost Accountants of India, ICMAI. In this digital era, cyber threats pose a significant risk to financial security, with cyber criminals exploiting vulnerabilities to steal money, data, and cause disruption through various tactics like phishing, malware, and ransomware, leading to financial losses and reputational damage. Today, the BFSI board of ICMAI is delving on this pertinent theme: cyber threats and financial frauds in the digital age, strengthening cyber resilience in BFSI and beyond, and how can CMAs play a role in cyber security management. And we are really honored and privileged to have with us as eminent speakers Mr. Simon Clayton Michel, his cybersecurity and technology advisor, and Mr. Andy Betts, cybersecurity expert, and Sri Doyon Guho, Secretary, London Overseas Chapter UK, as our moderator today. We heartily welcome our speakers and moderator. From the Institute, we are really privileged to have with us our Chairman, Sir, CMA Chitrondon Chattopadhyay, Sir, CMA Partho Choudhury. He is the advisor, BFSI Board. CMA Mohan D. Tangshale, sir. He is the former CMD of the Union Bank of India and former Chief Executive Indian
Cen-
Banks
Central Bank of India. Please correct it.
sorry, sir, a former CMD, just a correction, former CMD, Central Bank of India, and former Chief Executive Indian Banks Association. And we welcome you, sir. And CMA Dibyendu Roy is the Additional Director and HOD and Secretary of our BFSI board. And I also welcome our BFSI team members. So, just before we start, we are playing the Institute's anthem first, and then we will start our session.
असतो मा सद्गमय तमसो मा ज्योतिर्गमय मृत्योर्मामृतं गमय
मा सद्गमय तमसो मा ज्योतिर्गमय मृत्योर्मामृतं गमय
असतो मा सद्गमय तमसो मा ज्योतिर्गमय मृत्योर्मामृतं गमय ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्ति.
So now I would request CME Partho Choudhury, sir, who is the advisor of our BFSI board, to give the welcome address.
Namaskar. First of all, my apologies for not switching on the video because of connectivity issue. Respected chairman, respected dignitaries who are present in this particular session on a topic which is a very critical topic in the entire banking sector and financial sector. Cybersecurity is a primary concern for every regulator, including the regulator in India, that is the Reserve Bank of India. And it is also a very important issue for every financial entity which is operating in the ecosystem of Indian finance. We are actually looking forward to have a very fruitful and interactive session, learning from the experiences and the technical expertise of the dignitaries who are joining from abroad to us. I'm very sure that our members who are participating in this particular webinar will be immensely benefited at the end of the webinar to know the international perspective of how this particular issue is handled across the world. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to say these few words. And now I request the dignitaries to take over from me. And we are very keen, sir, to listen to you and your experience and, of course, your advices. Thank you very much. Have a great day.
Thank you so much, Partha Chaudhary, sir. Now we request CME Mohanty Tangshale, sir, to say a few words.
Good afternoon and good evening, everybody. It's indeed a very good initiative by the Institute to have a webinar on a very, very relevant subject of the cyber threats and financial frauds. Uh, to be very frank, as we are advancing the utilization of the uh, technology, moving more and more toward digitization, particularly the payment systems, the loan automation system, and and thus it's extremely essential that we all have a proper learning of how to strengthen the resilience for such financial frauds which are still happening, occurring, and how we can ensure that our BFI sector is much secured. I welcome our guest speakers, and I'll appreciate our colleagues who are here from the banking industry. Otherwise, we'll have a lot of learnings from them, and we'll definitely interact after the session, after your delivery, if we got some clarity, need some clarity on that. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, sir. Now we request our chairman, sir, CME Chitranu Chattopadhyay, sir, to give his address.
Thank you, Madam Lindashi. Namaskar to you all. I welcome to this timely and important webinar on cyber threats and financial frauds in the digital age, strengthening cyber resilience in BFSI and beyond, organized by the BFSI Board of the Institute of Cost Accountants of India, ICMAI. I convey my heartfelt gratitude to the esteemed speakers, Mr. Simon Clayton Mitchell, a cybersecurity and technology advisor, Mr. Andy Betts, cybersecurity expert, and the moderator of the webinar, CMA Udayan Gua, Secretary, LOCA, UK, without whom today's webinar could not be hosted. It's my privilege to introduce the Institute of Cost Accountants of India before our learned speakers and the participants who have joined today from various domains of the knowledge. The Institute of Cost Accountants of India, ICMA CMA, was established in 1944 and has been operating as a statutory body under the Ministry of Corporate Affairs since 1959. Following an act of Parliament, it regulates the profession of cost and management accountants in India. The institute has a vast network with over 100,000 CMAs and more than 500,000 of students, supported by 4 regional councils, 115 chapters, and 11 overseas centers, including the London Overseas Center. The institute is a founding member of the prestigious international accounting organizations such as International Federation of Accountants (IFAC), the Confederation of Asian and Pacific Accountants (CAPA), and South Asian Federation of Accountants (SAFA). Furthermore, international accounting associations have recognized ICMAI as a member body. The CMA course, curriculum, and training adhere to IFAC guidelines, ensuring global standards. In India, cost and management accountants play a significant role in taxation, audit, and financial compliance. Under the GST Act 2017, the Customs Act 1962, and the former Central Excise 1944, CMAs are authorized to conduct tax audits and compliance assessments under Section 66 of the CGST Act 2017. They are also recognized as internal auditors under Section 138 of the Companies Act 2013, covering the scope of income tax compliance. CMAs hold influential positions in finance and audit across corporate and government sectors, both at the central and state levels. Statistics show that over 60% of CMAs are engaged in finance, accounts, taxation activities within the public sector undertakings. Many CMAs serve as chief financial officers, director of finance, and chairperson and managing directors in both and public sector organizations. Additionally, Under various provisions of the Companies Act, cost accountants have recognitions in many ways. Globally, cost accountants play a crucial role in corporate governance, risk management, and financial sustainability. They are instrumental in leading finance functions and ensuring regulatory compliance. Recognized by regulatory bodies such as the Reserve Bank of India, RBI, the Security Exchange Board of India, SEBI, and various government authorities, CMS contributes significantly to financial reporting, audits, and compliance on par with the other professions. Their expertise in income tax compliance, audit, and financial management makes them indispensable in the evolving financial landscape. Friends, as we gathered here today, I am reminded of the critical role that the BFSI sector plays in driving economic growth and development. However, this sector is also increasingly vulnerable to cyber threats and financial frauds, which can have devastating consequences. The COVID 19 pandemic has accelerated the digital transformation of the BFSI sector, and while this has brought many benefits, it has also created new risks and challenges. Cyber criminals are becoming increasingly sophisticated, and their methods are evolving rapidly. As cost and management accountants, we play a pivotal role in helping organizations navigating their risks and challenges. Our expertise in financial management, risk management, and internal control makes us equally and uniquely positioned to help organizations strengthen their cyber resilience. In fact, in particular, a cost and management accountants can conduct risk assessment and identify potential vulnerabilities, develop and implement effective internal controls to prevent cyber threats and financial frauds, provide expertise on financial management and reporting to help organizations detect and respond to cyber threats and help and financial frauds. To prevent the financial frauds, CMS role will be prevalent. Help organizations develop and implement effective incident response plans. This webinar brings together a distinguished panel of experts who will share their insights and expertise on the latest cyber threats and financial frauds, as well as strategies for strengthening cyber resilience in the BFSI sector and beyond. Over the next 1.5 hours, we will explore topics such as the evolving cyber threat landscape and role of artificial intelligence and machine learning in preventing cyber threats, and the importance of collaboration and information sharing in preventing financial frauds. I would like to take this opportunity to thank our panelists, moderators, and BFSI department officials for their hard work and dedication in putting together this webinar. I would also like to thank each and every one of you for participating in this webinar. Your presence here today demonstrates your commitment to staying ahead of the curve and ensuring that our organizations are equipped to prevent, detect, and respond to cyber threats and financial frauds. Let us begin this important conversation on strengthening cyber resilience in the BFSI sector and beyond. Thank you for attending over here, and I'm really grateful to all our speakers and our panelists for their auspicious presence. Thank you.
Thank you so much, our chairman, sir. So now I had the privilege of introducing our speakers and moderators, sir.
Hello. So should I take over from here?
Just Simon Peter Michel. He is an experienced cybersecurity and technology advisor with strong experience in the leadership and delivery of consulting assignments across a broad range of clients, including UK central government, central London local authorities, financial services, and SME companies. Simon has advised clients on a broad range of cybersecurity projects, including review and assessment of cybersecurity operations for mobile operators in Asia Pacific, cybersecurity lead for London Local Authority, threat modeling of cloud-based solution for technology company, design and implementation of governance risk compliance process for major London-based financial services company, establishment of security posture for London local authority following ransomware attack, development of cloud security assurance framework for UK central government department, as a head of cyber capability for small agile software development company responsible for defining the company's information security posture. Here, his work included risk analysis of company's operations, review of contracts against requirements set by UK's Information Commissioner's Office. He has also acted as a technology advisor for mobile and fixed ICT network investments in EU, UK, Africa, Middle East. Previously, Sir was a founding member and head of product development and management for Asia Global Crossing and board member of Asia Global Crossing Japan. Sir is a BSc Honours in Electrical Engineering and MBA from London Business School and MSc in Finance and Economic Policy from SOAS University of London and an MSc in Distinction in Cybersecurity from City University of London. I welcome Simon, sir. Now I would introduce Andy Beck, sir. Sir has worked in cybersecurity and critical national infrastructure for 30 plus years, initially building and running critical national and government infrastructure at classified levels. He has also worked for a global charity NGO founded by City of London Police and the Manhattan DA for 5 years, working with Interpol, FBI, City of London Police, ITU, and World Economic Forum. Sir has been part of defense against nationwide attacks on the UK and has also helped multiple customers during ransomware attacks. More recently, he has developed ransomware response and ransomware negotiation proposition which have been executed in live scenarios. Sir is a chartered engineer and fellow of the Chartered Management Institute. He has presented at multiple conferences including RUSI, EU Parliament, World Economic Forum, Commonwealth Health Heads of Government Conference, ITU in Johannesburg, Wellington, Brisbane, Brussels, and Budapest. He is also a passionate sailor and skier. Currently, he is also studying for a part-time PhD in cybercrime at the University of Warwick. We welcome Andy Brett, sir. Now I welcome our moderator, sir, CMA Udayan Guru. CMA Udayan Guru, sir. He is an industrial leader with P&L functional and hands-on experience within technology services, technology and process transformation with a good understanding of emerging AI and agentic AI, data centers, sustainable energy. His work experience includes working at HCL Technology, Sutherland, PwC, ICI, McKinsey. His academic qualification includes MBA from London Business School, Bachelor's in Electrical Engineer from the Indian Institute of Technology, Kanpur, and he is also a member of the Institute of Cost Accountants of India. So we welcome our speakers and the moderators, sir. Now requesting our moderator, sir, to please take over the session now. Sir, please.
So, can I speak now?
Yes, sir, please start. Sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Chairman, honorable members, and it's a pleasure to speak here. And along with, I'd like to thank both Simon and Andy for giving their valuable time to be part of this interesting discussion. I'd like to specially thank CMA Mr. Chatterjee, who has been the driving force and the catalyst, as he says, for this initiative. We've been talking for a while, and it has taken some time to get this organized. But I'd like to again thank it. It takes a lot of effort to organize webinars like that. So thank you, Mr. Chatterjee, and hopefully we'll have a very interactive session. So the way we will run this today is, we have an agenda which has been circulated. I think just to put quick background, Simon and I go back. We're sitting together. We go back, I think, since 1992, and we studied together at London Business School. Our paths sort of go in very different ways, and then it so happened a couple of years ago we again met at the Taj for some occasion, and we started talking. And he sort of said, "I'm doing cyber." And my background comes from the world of technology services, and I also currently advise some of the two of the top global service providers in technology product companies. And in that thought, cyber, as I think has been said, is a very emerging area. And I'm also learning both from Simon and Andy. And we had a couple of sessions before we presented. So again, thank you, Simon, for taking this time. Andy, thank you very much. And Andy has a very interesting background, and it will come out in the presentation when they talk where the world is going. So I will pause there. Simon, do you want to put your presentation up and we start with that straight away?
Yes.
And I think the format will be, we will present for a while, and I will sort of make it interactive between me, Simon, and Andy here as we go along. Hopefully, the questions coming from the audience, you guys are, Mr. Dipinder, you are sort of collating that, right? And then you will send it to me over WhatsApp so I can look at it.
Some reason I have to share off screen. It's not letting me share.
Okay, we need the right to share on the screen.
I think they need to give us the right.
Yeah, you need to give us the right to share the screen, please, for the presentation. Dipindu, can you just enable that, or someone can enable that, please?
So you have the right, sir. You can directly share from the.
Okay, so we're just trying to do this. Simon is trying to do that.
Yes, yes, yes.
Yes.
Can we see this?
Can you guys see this?
It's not yet. Yeah, we are seeing the screen now. You have to show the presentations.
No, can you see the presentation?
No, no, not yet, not yet.
Okay, so what do we have? Just let's do this. Okay, quickly. So what needs to be done, and anything else?
Not sure.
I think, Simon, we were seeing maybe your desktop, but it wasn't sharing the PowerPoint.
Yeah. Thing is, I'd like to. It doesn't give me the option for some reason when I select share the window, Andy. It's not giving. I don't see the presentation.
Just click on that file which you want to share, sir, and then the share option comes.
Would you like me to try from this end?
Yeah, why don't you try on your end, Andy?
Can you give Andy also to see if he can share?
Yeah, I'll try. As you can see, everyone, Simon and I believe in resilience, so we're at different locations, not deliberately for this reason, but okay, let's try this. Can you see my PowerPoint now?
I can see you. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right, you're steering.
Great. Would you like me to kick off then, Simon, and say once again thanks to everybody for this this brilliant opportunity actually to speak with all of you, and thank you, Chairman and the organisers for pulling this together. As we said, if you can think of questions as we go through, and I would say on behalf of Simon and myself, you may think of something after the presentation's over. So I think we're more than happy to respond to people and your members. Clearly, it's a very big membership. In any way we can help to help you to stay safe online, then that would be great. So we've done introductions already. So I think that slide nicely covers who we are. So if we move on, and this clearly is what we're here to talk about, as we said already, cyber. And I think it's important to say cyber and fraud, and both myself and Simon will talk around the maybe the differences between the two of these and the terms that can be used quite interchangeably. So the privilege of the first slide is really with myself, and I want to take you back slightly in history. I think, as you all know, as management cost accountants, that fraud is not a new thing, and we think of cyber as being a new thing. But in 1834, the first recorded example of, I guess, electronic or electrical attack was somebody listened to the French stock exchange telegraph link. They effectively listened to the Morse code. Somebody tapped the wires, and they shorted some stocks. So it's the first example of basically a technological crime. So if we move on through time, so the internet used to be called the ARPANET, and one thing that the internet and myself share is we were both born in 1969. So I love that fact that my job is fighting crime on the internet, and we were both born in the same year. But suffice to say, 1972 is the first example of what then were called worms. So worm is maybe a primitive virus, a primitive malware. So it took a whole 3 years from the invention of the, if you like, forerunner to the internet for the first element of proper electronic cybercrime to have been recorded. Moving on, and I don't want to steal Simon's thunder, but I'll bring both of these in. So these are the first big recorded events of tens of millions of dollars being stolen from banks, naturally, over the internet. So you'll all be familiar that bank robbery, particularly in the UK and throughout the world, has really declined. And again, Simon's going to talk about this now, because frankly, it's a dangerous and very physical activity. The internet has brought many great things for us all, but unfortunately, if you were a criminal overseas, the ability to steal money from a jurisdiction and avoid detection and arrest is very high, which is why criminals initially started stealing money from banks. If we then move on, so 2008 is probably one of the first biggest recorded examples. And by the way, these are all headline news. So there are lots of other smaller examples of cybercrime and fraud that I'm not talking about here. We could talk all day if we gave you every example, but 2008. So a Trojan, and Simon will talk more about Trojans later on, stealing banking information. So this is important. So since the year 2000, criminals have continued to do all of the things on these slides, and I'll touch on that later, but stealing information as opposed to stealing money starts to become a trend. As we move into 2017, many of you have probably heard about WannaCry. The reason why that's out there is it hit the news of being greater than 300,000 people were attacked. And then moving on back to the data point, and this is probably my kind of closing point for this slide. So Marriott Hotel in 2020, just before COVID, lost the information of 5.2 million guests. Now, why is this important? So stealing my data and selling it on the dark web, the data on Andy Bates or on any of you is probably for sale between $1 and $5 per person. So 5.2 million information of individuals is worth $5.2 million. But why do criminals use their criminal money to buy data from other criminals? Well, if I can use your data and steal $10 every day from your bank account, then I've stolen $52 million. But the importance of that last check mark, I guess, is if you look through this, the criminals are now stealing as much money in 2020 as they were stealing in 1998. So what's new? They're stealing it from customers of banks as well as still stealing it from banks. So I can't see anybody on the screen because I'm presenting, but hopefully that's making sense with everybody so far. So we've looked at the past, and now let's quickly look at the future. So ENISA is the European Community's Cyber Research Division. So this is their opinion, which I think we do agree with, on what are the new threats going forward. And some of these may sound a little bit crazy, but we'll touch on these. So, and these are in no real priority order. They're just 9 or 10 discussion points. So supply chain compromise. So that's important for many people. But one big reason is when you buy software, almost nobody on this call, probably including Simon and myself, write their own code. You buy code, you buy services from other people. In fact, in the UK, we've had a big tradition of outsourcing IT services, particularly to businesses in India. So supply chain is super important. No one organization now, particularly with a connected internet and global trading, exists on its own. So compromising somebody downstream in your supply chain to attack you or render your business out of business and therefore cause a ransomware is an important attack vector that we're seeing in the last 5 years or so. I'm not going to go through all of these, but so human error, number 4, human error exploited. For your organization, you're used to risk and audit, and you do risk and audit for 2 reasons. One is because human error happens, and also because there are sometimes bad people in the system. So one thing that the first chart I hopefully showed you is that crime is not a new thing, clearly. As soon as Homo sapiens and humans were able to walk and invented fire, crime was invented shortly thereafter. So some bad people in the community who will always use technology to achieve crime. So this is not a technology-caused crime, it's a technology-enabled crime. A very quick war story. So the police service of Northern Ireland lost a whole load of critical data on their police officers simply by somebody put in a freedom of information request and an admin person accidentally released that data. Now, in these cases, and whenever I investigate these kind of things, the difference between human error and insider threat is very hard to find. If you have a malicious actor in your organization and you find them, they're naturally going to say, oh, it wasn't my fault, I just made a mistake. So that will be with us throughout. If we go into some of these other things, and I want to compare 8 and 9, so we'll talk about AI later on. So everybody's got an opinion on AI, but actually one of the biggest challenges in this industry is skills shortage. And I think there's a lot of relevancy to your organization today around that. There are approximately 3 million vacancies in the global cybersecurity industry. So on the one hand, people have opinions about AI, but on the other hand, there are not enough humans to solve this problem. So you can see how the marriage of those two coming together is probably quite important. The rise of hybrid advanced threats, and one thing which I do for a lot of boards around particularly the UK is a thing called ransomware simulation. And when we do that, the ability to set an organization running all over the place by all kinds of different attacks happening at the same time is a great attack vector. And we're seeing this a lot in all the ransomware cases that I've worked with most recently, where criminals don't now use one targeted way of attacking an organization. They attack on multiple fronts. So if you're familiar with the theory of warfare and those kind of things, people at war have multiple techniques going on at the same time. Criminals are starting to do these kind of things. And then over here, more exotically, so number 6. So several years ago, when I worked with the British government deploying things overseas, the concept of hijacking the bandwidth in a satellite was very much a threat, and it was a very specialist threat. When we think now that with Starlink and both Amazon and Google are all launching multiple internet connected satellites. So Starlink is basically broadband internet provided by Elon Musk with about, I think, 3,000 satellites flying over our heads. The danger, and people are thinking about these kind of things, the danger of somebody hijacking a satellite and causing satellites to collide in space is now a real threat. So this is the slide that I don't want you to have nightmares with, but this is where people who do a lot of thinking about this kind of stuff are starting to think around. And I think if there's one thing I give you from the last slide and this slide is the human factor, and we'll touch on that a lot as Simon and I go through the slides today.
So Andy, can I just pick up on one important point you mentioned, the human factor, what you talked in Northern Ireland example. I think for people in India, I think it's just to put a bit, giving a bit background why it was such an important issue where the details of their home addresses and everything came out in the public domain.
It's a good question. So
explaining to the audience the severity of that information. Being somewhat simple person not following the rule, just giving the information out.
It's a very good question. So a lot of humans get very stressed at work. I think we all suffer stress at work. You'll be aware of some political issues in Northern Ireland. So the home addresses of police officers in Northern Ireland is a very sensitive thing. To release that data in the public domain or to people who want to cause harm to those people, it's meant some police officers have had to move house. These examples have happened in the past on a very small scale. So the threat to life to thousands of police officers because people who want to cause them harm now know where they live, where their children go to school, was a big issue. That was not a sophisticated attack. That was somebody literally putting in an email request in the right phrase, in the right form of trickery to an admin person who was very stressed at the time who released the data. And I think the point of using that one pointed example is a lot of the numbers which I'm about to show you, cybercrime, I'm about to reveal some bewildering statistics that apply to the whole global economy. A lot of the headlines and the things I've just talked about, particularly the space stuff, are very interesting. People like to talk about. Most of the money is stolen by high volume, low value attacks. And that's why I was keen to say that stealing 5 million data from a whole hotel chain and stealing £10 every month from somebody's bank account probably isn't noticed because people don't audit their bank accounts very well. So there's a lot of ways of achieving high economic gain for criminals without being too sophisticated. And a kind of personal opinion is, yes, we need to watch out for the sophisticated attacks, but as we'll probably close on, some of the basic points are ones of making people very safe. In fact, if there's one thing I can say to all of this audience, there are some simple things you can all do that make you and your organizations a lot safer before you get into the sophisticated technology. So I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for pulling that through. So, and here is the number. So the total cost of all cybercrime and fraud in 2021 is $6 trillion. So many organizations, I need to emphasize quite how big 6 trillion is. If you look at the global GDP, if cybercrime was a country, it would be the third largest GDP. It would be in the G7. It would be in the G3. So the GDPs today in the global economy are America, China, and then cybercrime and fraud, followed by the rest of the nations. So to put that into context, and you guys know this better than me, GDP of Germany and Japan combined, just for context, is 10 trillion. So think about the amount that you audit, you check people's accounts, the banking system, etc. This is like not putting oil in the engine of the economy. It's like putting sand in the gears of the economy. It's dragging the global economic system down. Imagine what any of us could do with $6 trillion to benefit the environment, the economy. And then this is a quote from a guy I used to work with was at the time the UK National Director of National Cybersecurity Centre, which is part of GCHQ. And this goes exactly to the point about the human thing. The industry is trying to sell lots of technological answers to a technological problem. And his quote is, the industry is out there saying, buy my new magical amulet and you'll be fine. But actually, the same guy literally says that information assurance, cyber defense, is 80% people and process and 20% technology. Yet the industry and people are very focused on the technology. So again, if this is good news for you as an organization, one of the big things that all of you as practitioners do is audit, risk, assessment, checks, balances, those kind of things. That's exactly what the cyber industry should be doing, but we're not doing enough of it. People in this industry and people in the IT industry are very focused on buying some technology. It's a bit like buying an antibiotic when you've got a cold. You're actually better to wash your hands and buy the antibiotic when you get sick. So I hope that metaphor is helping. So, and I'm afraid to say, things are getting worse. So the cybercrime growth rate is at a 25% CAGR. So if this continues, then by 2030, you could argue that cybercrime becomes the world's biggest GDP. Now, clearly, the economy of the globe can only sustain so much, so there's a fear that this will plateau. But this is a big problem, and it's not getting better, basically. So the threat is becoming overwhelming. And back to my point about somebody who accidentally released the wrong amount of data, and back to my point about AI and the lack of staff, when people get stressed, they can do really silly things. They can be tricked into doing silly things. And that's one of the main vectors that cyber criminals use. So moving on, Simon, over to you.
Yeah, so what I'll just, because these slides are animated, I'll just say Andy, and if you can click through. So to pick up on Andy's point that things are getting worse, just some interesting information. If you were to click on a phishing email, from you clicking on that phishing email from a malicious link, which contains maybe a virus that can access your computer, it takes somebody about 72 minutes, which is just over an hour, to actually get to your data, to start exfiltrating your data. Another interesting thing, if you go back about 5 years, 70% of attacks were a result of somebody hacking into your system. So they use sophisticated computer technology to hack into your network. Today, 70% of attacks, actually, they log in with valid credentials. So again, Andy's talked about information being released. They figure out passwords, they get your ID, it's available on the dark net, on the internet, and they log in. So they're actually logging in as valid users or bypassing controls which stop them logging in. 3/4 of large UK companies suffered a cyber attack in 2023. Next. And AI is going to make things worse. It's going to make attacks a lot more effective. So lifelike avatars for social engineering attacks. There was a UK company was attacked last year, and a finance director in Hong Kong received a Teams call, or maybe a Google Meet, very similar to what we're on now. And his director of finance appeared on the call just as Andy or I is appearing to you. And the director of finance had a story and said, we need to transfer money out to this third-party account. And over the period of a week, there were 3 or 4 calls, all video calls. This director of finance requested that money be sent out. By the time they realized it was a fraud, they'd lost $25 million. The whole thing was generated by AI. Improved phishing emails. Emails are becoming an increasingly important attack vector. We've always had phishing emails, but in the past, they were probably a lot easier to spot. They were amateurish. The spelling was bad. Well, AI makes them significantly more sophisticated. I actually worry that email can become unusable in certain cases. And then software viruses that are able to change their signature, so they're very difficult to detect, and AI enables that. And then AI can also be used to look at an organization, a bank or a financial institution, and analyze its attack surface and come up with the best way to exploit vulnerabilities to maximize the effectiveness of an attack. Andy? So I wanted to introduce you to a gentleman called Willie Sutton, who was a US bank robber in the United States in the 1930s. Willie went by the nickname Slick Willie, and he is very famous because of a quote that he made when he was arrested. They finally arrested him, And they said, "Why do you rob banks, Willie?" And he said, "Because that's where the money is." And given that we're talking to experts and leaders in the financial sector in India, you're wondering, well, why would people come after us or our institutions? It's because that's where the money is. He carried a gun, and they discovered that he never loaded it. And they said, "Why do you never load the gun?" And he said, "Oh, you don't have a loaded gun. Somebody could get hurt." And they said, "So why do you have the gun in the first place?" And his other quote was, "Because you can't rob a bank on charm and personality." Well, actually, today you can. A lot of social engineering is about charm and personality. The first picture here, second picture rather, that Andy's just displayed is the Lazarus heist. And this was a group of North Korean hackers who actually attacked the Bank of Bangladesh, the central bank of Bangladesh. A very sophisticated attack that they planned for over a year. And the idea was basically to drain the central bank of Bangladesh of all of its money, which was in excess. Its foreign reserves were over $1 billion US. For a minor technical glitch, they only managed to get about 40 million, but it very easily could have basically drained the complete central bank of a country. Andy? This was actually reported in the, it was 80 million. This was reported in the Indian press. 81 million from the Bangladesh bank. Andy? We're also seeing the move to crypto assets. So the numbers are significantly larger, and the attacks on crypto have been really headline numbers, 600 million from the Ronin network. The Guardian title there, this refers back to the attack that I said on the UK engineering company where they used a fake video. This was Arab, and it says 20 million pounds. It's about $25 million in what they call deep fake. So using AI to do a deep fake. And one more here, Andy, which was, again, this is the largest attack on cryptocurrency, which is very, very recently. Think $1.4 billion of Ethereum Bitcoin has been stolen. So the numbers are really getting very, very large, and Bitcoin has certainly enabled cyber attackers. Over to you.
So back to me then, and following on the economic theme. So as many of you know, Maersk is a large shipping line. I think they move on average 1 in 8 of all containers on the planet. And at the risk of this being slightly political, in 2015, as we know, there was the start of Russian-Ukrainian aggression. That aggression started with a cyber attack. So Russia decided to take down as many businesses in Ukraine as they could. In Ukraine, it was mandatory to file all of your tax electronically using one software system. Every Ukrainian business used this software system, and because they're really good at IT and had taken all the recommendation from cyber professionals, they switched on the auto update setting. So Russia infected the server which issued the auto update to all of the tax software in Ukraine. This meant that every Ukrainian business got a virus, namely a ransomware, and was shut down. Unfortunately, Maersk have an office in every country in the world, and at the time had a very, what I would call a flat network. So they got hit with the ransomware. At the time, this made the headlines as the largest ransomware attack on the planet. They lost an estimated 300 million in downtime and an estimated 10 million to fix the issues in their IT system. However, the criminals, namely Russia, didn't demand any ransomware, so no money was paid. So far, we've talked about criminals trying to steal money and trying to steal data to get money. This is an example of a political crime that cost an organization money, but they were not targeted. So my big motto here is, I think from what myself and Simon have said so far, is that if you're anywhere near a bank or anywhere near money, the likelihood of you being targeted is quite high. I spoke to one CEO and CFO after they'd been ransomwared in the UK, and they said, if they'd have just looked at Companies House, they would have realized we're nearly bankrupt. Why did they go after us? And the answer was, there's such a thing as accidental ransomware. So getting in the way of somebody else's fight can be painful. You're probably wondering why the flag of the Gambia is on there. And I love this story. This is a great dinner party story that I'm happy for you to share. So in most IT infrastructures, there's a thing called an Active Directory server. It's the heartbeat of an IT system. Maersk is so large, they had 144 Active Directory servers. When this ransomware attack happened, accidentally, 143 of the servers were compromised. In the Gambia, the power had gone down. Somebody'd stolen the diesel from the backup generator, so that server was fine. It was effectively immuted from the virus running around the Maersk organization. The guys who helped them called up the guy in the Gambia, said, remove the hard disk, meet me in Geneva. They met him in Geneva. They made 144 copies of that hard disk, sent them around the world, and basically rebooted Maersk. Lots more things happened to get Maersk running as an organization. Otherwise, that 300 million number wouldn't have been so big. Had it not have been for that almost comical coincidence, that number could have easily been $1 billion and 100 million to repair. So I guess my point is sometimes you take advice from professionals and do the right things. If they've had diesel in their generator, which was also part of advice, they would have been down for a lot longer. So sometimes you just have to run with the luck. And I guess my big point is they were not targeted in the first place. They got out of this just by sheer luck. So a lot of other things happen in the world of both global and political cybercrime that affect lots of other people, whether you think you've done the right thing or not. Sometimes you have to run with the dynamics of the situation. And again, my closing thought on this is when I do ransomware simulation with boards, this is not like a fire drill. It's not like running your business continuity plan. The criminals will evolve what they are doing to attack an organization. So think of cybercrime more like playing chess. So you really need to be on your A game and practice these kind of things to help to get yourself ahead of the criminals.
Andy, just taking that example of Maersk, it's a very interesting example, and you mentioned there are 144 active service directories across the globe. So does it mean, given what is happening, any thought that there should always be some offline directory sitting somewhere, completely out, which is what I call contrary to what I have also seen IT people talk about, and maybe that's the new mantra coming up. Why don't you give some thoughts on it?
No, absolutely. So in the industry, we call this immutable storage. So it's effectively data that can't be deleted. But yes, multiple backups, as maybe Simon and myself will touch on. If a criminal is going to get within your organization, they may be in your systems for up to 90 days before that attack happens. We found cases of criminals who've actually set up an employee in a large organization and they've been paying themselves money via that organization, even though the employee doesn't exist. So again, key use of audit and lots of the skills that are probably on this call today. But yes, in this case, for example, a thing called segmentation, micro-segmentation, anything that can isolate your company, your bank, your organization into lots of small pieces so it will contain the virus into little areas is definitely a good recommendation. A thing called immutable storage, definitely, and cold storage. In other words, storing something in a place that is not connected to the network and you only connect it when you want to do these kind of backups, absolutely. And in the case of the root cause for this, I recommend everybody on this call to have auto update for their mobile phone, for their PC at home. But sometimes in the case of tax software, which could take down the whole organization, do you switch on auto update or do you put it into a safe place and then roll it out across the organization? Organizations as big as Maersk and the British military and other militaries do this kind of stuff now by habit. Much harder for smaller businesses to do these things. But again, smaller businesses are not going to be subject to these kind of issues. But yeah, we could talk for hours about the recommendation, but you are completely right. They accidentally achieved what we call immutable storage and isolated backup by the coincidence of what happened in the Gambia. So yeah, great way to illustrate that. So thank you.
Well done. Yeah.
So sort of summarizing the issues that we've gone through earlier, cybercrime pays. Two examples there. One was on a financial organization, insurance called Can Financial, a group called Evil Core ransomware, done for $40 million. Much more recently, in 2023, Caesar Resorts, which is the gambling chain in the United States, they run casinos. A European group called Scattered Spider attacked them and managed to take 15 million from them. So strong financial incentives, and there are sophisticated dark markets for the malware. So it's increasingly easy to conduct attacks. You can actually buy the software to conduct the attack on what's called the dark web. If you're not sure about all the moving parts, like how do I collect the money after I've done the attack, there are actually people out there called exploit brokers who will act as middlemen, who will take the money from the organization and then distribute amongst all the people that have helped you conduct the attack. And to add to the challenge, it's now nation states and organized crime and a blurring between the two. So you've actually got very sophisticated organized crime syndicates aligned with the government out of the country in which they operate, or with another country, who are actually helping facilitate this. Andy? It's actually been described, so the barriers to entry are low. You don't actually need massive skills to conduct the attack, and it's been described as giving rocket launchers to teenagers. The attack surface, in other words, your organization, the IT assets within your organization, the attack surface are hard to protect. Often large organizations are running legacy IT systems. The attacker only needs to find a single door open. You as a defender, you have to close every single door, and that is especially true in very large companies, which are finance, utilities, critical national infrastructure. Andy touched on this earlier. There's a skills shortage. The skills are complex and varied. We're talking about IT, technical operations, social engineering. You need complex teams. There is a skills shortage. And the industry is actually quite fragmented. The comment made earlier, cyber is 80% people, 20% technology, but there's thousands of companies offering remedies, and far too many companies are thinking that technology will save them. In reality, it is actually quite complex to construct effective solutions. Microsoft did a seminar a couple of weeks ago in London that I was at, and they pointed out the average organization today is running 40 different cybersecurity tools. Okay. Now, I'm actually now going to take you through an attack, and it was described at the time as the largest and most sophisticated attack that the world had ever seen. And it's very relevant, I believe, to the financial sector, to the sector that all of our participants are working in. And it started with a company you may never have heard of called SolarWinds. And they just click once. And SolarWinds produced a product called Orion, which did network monitoring and network security. And it was used by companies all over the world, governments. It's used by local governments in London and America, etc. And the green box that has just been illustrated shows that SolarWinds thought they had a safe environment. And they wrote software, which is the black box on the left. And to turn software into the ones and zeros that computers understand involves a process called compilation. So you compile the software, which turns it into ones and zeros. And then you take that and you turn it into a software update. So Andy was talking about a software update to the tax system. We all get software update requests to our mobile devices, and those are then pushed out. And in the case of SolarWinds, they were pushed out. You may not be able to read those decals, but the 5 at the top are the 5 branches of the US military. The green one on the right is the US Department of Energy, which oversees the atomic arsenal. You have NASA. You have the National Security Agency, which is America's spying agency, electronic spying agency. Microsoft, Intel, 90% of the Fortune 500 companies used SolarWinds Orion. Now, you'll notice that the green box around SolarWinds has turned to red, because what they didn't know was they had a hacker in the system, and the hacker had produced what's called a Trojan horse and managed to slide it into the compilation process, which affected the software update. This was very deliberate. And then that software update with the Trojan horse went out to all of these organizations. What's very interesting is it didn't do anything for 2 weeks. It just sat there, and then after 2 weeks it woke up. It signaled out to the attackers which organization it was in. If it wasn't an organization they were interested in, it deleted itself. But if it was, like the US military or the spying agencies or certain big industrial companies, it then started to steal information from within the organization. They're still battling to remove this and fully understand the effects. Now, SolarWinds, the way the hackers got in was, if you look down there next to the hacker, the password, somebody had set their password to SolarWinds 123. And that was how the hackers originally got in. They spent months understanding the software development process, how to inject their Trojan horse software into the compilation and get it out as a software update. So your software update is actually the problem. It contained the malicious software. Okay.
So you're probably all feeling quite depressed now. So there's some good news starting to come into the equation soon. However, I think just to quickly talk about where we're going with regulations and what's happening on the global stage. So DORA is a European feature, and you may think, well, you're in UK or India or America, why does DORA matter to you? So DORA is the Digital Operational Resiliency Act. And I think if I were to give you a new word in the Oxford English Dictionary, it would be bounce back ability. So I think if we've said anything so far, this isn't that you may get attacked, you will get attacked. And what DORA and resilience acts around other nations are encouraging is the ability to be resilient, the ability to come back up. And as we said already, immutable storage, multiple backups and copies are starting to become important. Also, you're all probably familiar with GDPR. So GDPR is a supranational regulation, not supernatural, supranational, meaning that the EU Commission believes that they can sue and impose this regulation on other people. So if you financially connect with anybody in the EU, they need to adhere to DORA. We've talked about supply chain. So you could be within their supply chain. So their banking contracts or financial contracts with you could start to impose DORA stipulations on yourself. We circled there ICT third-party risk management. And just to talk about this, we've got a slight illustrated example. We've mentioned this already, that no company, no bank, no person is an island anymore. We live in a very interconnected world. So ICT, information communications technology, applications, the solar winds, the Ukrainian Russian incident with Maersk are all good examples of how something can get into your organization via this kind of way. A very small, quick war story. I was speaking to people in the Bank of England a few years ago. You're probably familiar that I think 42 banks who operate sterling, move sterling around in the UK. They went through their supply chain. They went to the first level, the second level, and the third level. They found one guy under a railway arch in London who wrote a very small piece of code, but that small piece of code was in 20 of those 42 banks who control sterling. And that small piece of code was fundamental in how money was moved in the sterling network with the central bank. So had that one company been compromised, it had the ability to potentially impact 20 of the 40 banks or 50% of the UK banking infrastructure. So the UK has had a Financial Resilience Act before DORA. The European Community has adopted as an advance more. You can see the big aspects there. For the sake of time, I'm not going to go through this in depth, but it talks about this. It really talks about this concept of supply chain, but also resilience. And again, think of the word bounce back ability. Think, as Diane said earlier, if you do go down with ransomware, you need to get back up. And especially if you are a bank or part of the financial structure, which you will have some influence in that, you have no option to come back up. The Indian economy, the European economy, the UK economy depends on its banking and finance status. So there's kind of a double whammy for all of you here in that criminals want to attack you because you have money, because you have data on people who have money. But the economy depends on the lifeblood of any economy, in fact, probably multiple economies. So the other thing I'll just point out here in this box next here is digital operational resiliency testing. So back to what we were saying earlier. So I run a lot of ransomware simulations where I take boards through their paces. The big thing all boards realize once they go through this is not an IT problem. This is an everybody problem. It can be anybody who can accidentally cause or become a victim of a cybercrime, but also what happens in the media with your share price, how you run your business, which application you bring back up first. These are all very non-IT decisions. So this is a team sport, I guess is what we're trying to say here. But moving on, and this is going to touch a little bit more on the societal effect, if I could say that. So here's our classic bank, which has all of its multiple interconnections. Bank deals with finance, clearly, but every bank has clearly got customers and businesses out there, and that has an effect on society. So when I speak with Lloyds Bank several years ago, Lloyds Bank is the largest retail bank in the UK. And almost everybody I speak to who deals with cyber and fraud in Lloyds Bank say, we have a duty of care to UK PLC because we're the largest bank, so we have the largest influence. But also, therefore, if UK PLC suffers, they as a bank suffer. So remember we said earlier that $6 trillion is effectively being stolen from the global economy. So a percentage of that will be being stolen from your customers. So what we found banks doing, particularly in the UK and the USA, is starting to help their customers to be more cyber secure. So we talked about supply chain and third-party risk management. In other words, people who supply you with IT could be the cause of your problem. I prefer to think of it as a supply circle. So almost everybody has customers, and therefore you are a supplier to them, and everybody has suppliers to you. So if we can start to think about this virtuous circle, if you move money to somebody, if you give money to somebody, you make them a target for cyber criminals. There's almost in that conversation a duty of care that says, have you helped them to check out their cybersecurity? Because after all, you are therefore their supplier. They should be asking you about your third-party cybersecurity because you could be their third party. I know there's a lot in that, and I hope that makes sense. Any quick questions, Udayan and Simon, on that to add to that before we move on?
No. So Andy, I think it makes a lot of sense. I think let's finish. I think the questions which will come up, funnily enough, looking at this whole bank thing on the right, and I think Simon mentioned earlier also, email might become unusable. Let's sort of have a discussion around that at the end, but not now. Let's move on for the time in the interest of
I think the big point as a move on is
Someone
that
has a question. Someone has a question. Mr. Chaddy, someone was asking something.
I was just going to close, and we can pick up some questions at the end on this slide. But I think my big point is that you all know that money is a great lever to make people do things. And so it's a great incentive in the financial industry, of which you all a key part. You have a great incentive to help people to increase their cyber awareness, their cyber maturity. So we're seeing in the UK and the States, the banking industries help to drive better cybersecurity standards in wider businesses and wider customers. I think that's the key point now.
Fantastic. Let's move on in the interest of time. We'll
Simon.
discuss it later.
So, as Andy says, there is hope. You start with effective governance starts with understanding your assets and who owns them. So on the left-hand side, your data and systems, your software, your hardware, your devices, and your extended supply chain. And you need to understand who is accountable legally, operationally, who's running it technically, who is the technical experts, who is managing security across all of your assets. And then you then take that knowledge and turn that into a governance framework. So the first thing is, like in the UK, we understand the legal requirements. We're held by GDPR. So that's your legal governance. Your operational governance is you define policies, which are the do's and don'ts. So this is what you should do, this is what you don't do. And then very importantly, procedures. So if you have tightly bound procedures, you're far less likely to make mistakes or miss something because people are operating against an agreed way of doing things. Standards help define what those things should be. And then you move into the technical side, say, okay, so how do we implement security both technically and operationally so that we actually ensure we're following the procedures that we've defined for safely working? And then the last part, the security, is the security assurance. How do I know? How do I know I am safe? How do I know I'm doing all that? And if you click one more time, Andy, you go back with an assurance process and look at your legal requirements, your policies, procedures, your implementation, and say, are we doing what we think we're meant to be doing? Okay, Andy?
And then I guess this is a bit more the good news, and I'll quickly page through this. So to build on what Simon said there, taking from regulations, whether UK or international, security standards, and then controls and policies. This is the bit where if I was American, I'd say to all of you, you got this, because in the financial world, in the management cost accounting world, you know how to do these things. This is a very transferable skill. So back to what we said, that the cyber industry is lacking skills. You guys have skills in governance beyond anything that Simon and I could ever dream of. I guess the big difference, and when we talk about risk, is in the financial sector, everybody understands risk, but in the world of cyber, you could spend an almost infinite amount of money and you will never be 100% secure. I will never tell anybody they're 100% secure. And as I mentioned, the high likelihood that 100% of all companies will be successfully attacked is very high. So in the world of GRC, governance, risk, and compliance, you guys all know about governance. With risk, as we can see in this circle in the middle, you have to make some risk decisions, and some of those you can mitigate with technical controls. Some of those you can maybe outsource, but remember, the responsibility for your business, your bank, is always with you. But in some cases, we talk about acceptable risk. In some cases, it is unpalatable to spend millions to try and stop a problem when there's an inevitability that the criminals will find somewhere else. You shouldn't give up, you shouldn't surrender. But we have this concept of a high risk tolerance, and people talk about their risk appetite. As we go around this circle in the middle, clearly you have to implement those controls, which again is a very transferable skill, which I think everybody on this call in your organization start to understand. But the big point here is that a lot of defense, and where a lot of people who Simon and I work with, they love doing the technical stuff, they forget about policy and process. And that's actually the boring stuff. Policy and process is where the big differences can be made, and where you've all got transferable skills to help people to do those kind of things. You then need to validate your controls, because it's great dreaming something up and writing a policy document. How do you know that works? So feedback loops are super important here. And then to go into compliance. And again, I'll make the same point, that the monitor bit, so security operation centers, which are 24/7 people with analysts and tools, that's a key point. But if we read all the other bullet points on this slide here, self-assessing your procedures, doing audits, checking the frameworks, looking at governance, you notice we've got a lot more bullet points on the non-technical stuff than the technical stuff. And you're probably now bored with hearing myself and Simon say this, but the big mistakes we are seeing in the industry is people buying technology like a firewall or the latest AI tool, and they believe that they're safe. You need to do all of these things. You need technology and process and people and training combined together. And then ultimately, if you've started with some great law and regulation, guess what? Law and regulation is always a little bit behind the curve of technology, and it's certainly always behind the criminals' latest ideas. And in fact, one of the things I love about my job, I don't want to compliment the criminals. Most criminals I've had the displeasure of interacting with are really clever. When I see some of the things they've done, and we'll touch on this in a few slides' time, you are dealing with a really clever adversary. So the law and regulation is your minimum viable starting point. But my point about this is reviewing all of this thing and regularly going through this cycle, preferably more than annually, is super important to make sure you're doing the right thing.
So Andy, if I can just add to that, very interestingly, so I was involved about 8-10 years ago in complete end-to-end outsourcing of both the operations and the data for a 20 billion pound deposit book in the UK. We exactly went through the same exercise, but coming back but we had just not entered the world of complete online. It was still offline, but we need, you had paper forms, letters, and emails. It was not 100% online at that point in time. But the interesting part is we had to have a very similar framework. But if I look back and see where the Bank of England and the FCA really question was exactly, are you safe? Because at that time, this customer's money is going to get stolen. So one of the things I've been thinking through post that is there is no standardized framework for all these. And I think whether this accounting institute, whether there's some institute who's come up with some framework, so it comes as a cookie cutter. Anyone who does any outsourcing or whatever work you do, there should be a standardized audit framework.
Yeah.
So you get trained, you need training from both people who are going to oversee you, as well as I see, people who are delivering. So that there is a understanding at both sides. And as you rightly said, it's not about firewall, it's about the whole process, which makes sense.
Yeah, and to be very quick answer to this, over on the left, things like NIST, Cyber Essentials, which is really for small businesses in the UK, CBEST, which is the Bank of England standard, which they apply to all of the sterling banks. There are lots of great standards out there, which I think we can point you to. I don't think you'll ever find one global standard. And the reason for that is India is different than Germany. Germany is slightly different from the UK, etc. But I think my big commendation would be, don't start from a blank piece of paper. There are plenty of things, particularly we've mentioned down on the left-hand side, which are really great starting points. There, however, is, and this is where the Maersk story comes in, my big recommendation to everybody is, I see so many people who disengage brain and engage system. They go, somebody's given me some rules, I've done all the things on the rules, I must be safe. Nah, criminals are clever. Criminals' job is to steal your money and your data. They will try and outthink you. So everything on the left is really your starting page. And the brain, which is why we'll talk about AI in a second, is the thing that's really going to keep you and your businesses safe. So is that fair, do you think?
Yeah, absolutely.
Great.
And I think it's absolutely, and let's pick up on this at the end because this is a very important theme. It is about people rather than just buying technology.
Exactly. And talking at the intersection between people and computers, let's talk about AI. No cyber presentation, or indeed no board presentation is complete without AI. So, and we're nearly there. I mean, I'd love to do audience participation here, but I appreciate this is recorded. So, is AI new? So my normal audience participation is, when did you first remember clicking on something on the internet that says, I'm not a robot? To give you the answer, the year 2000. So Carnegie Mellon University invented the concept in the year 2000. So for 25 years, we've been telling computers that we're not a robot, and yet suddenly AI seems to be a new thing. You may wonder why this picture's here, and I'm the guy on the left, stood at the back. I don't know quite why I'm there, but this is me outside number 10 Downing Street. So over 20 years ago, I run some big...
And number 10 Downing Street, just for everyone, is the UK Prime Minister's office.
Yes, good point. Thank you. I took that for granted, yes. So I was running infrastructure which had on it maybe 1 million civil servants and local authority workers. We were using machine learning 20 years ago because normal virus scanners were not good enough to deal with all of the incoming cyber threats 25 years ago, trying to take down the British government. Cyber criminals actually outthought that, and we were hit with one of the first nation state phishing attacks. This is why I look so old, by the way. I'm actually only 32 years old. It's just been a really, really tough gig. So machine learning and artificial intelligence have been in the world of cyber attack and defense for at least 20 years. So why is the big news about AI now? Well, first of all, compute power moves on exponentially every year. So AI is much more powerful than it used to be, but there's also a lot more data. You hear us talk about big data, you've heard of data being stolen. So really, this is why, although it's been around as a technology for easily 20 or 25 years, the criminals are using AI, and we as an industry, a wider IT industry, are now starting to embrace AI. Simon.
So as we embrace AI, there are a number of issues. So no, Andy, don't go back, please. Thank you. You start with AI is not actually intelligent. And I keep reminding people of that. And therefore, the reality is it doesn't have any understanding of the context of your question. And the consequence means that you could end up with inaccurate or misleading information. The next limitation is that AI optimized for norms. It looks for the average answer. It's not looking for outliers in the world of information. So you'll get an average result. So it could actually, the result is you may actually exclude outliers as part of your design, and yet you wanted that. And what it can do is AI can actually exacerbate biases or eliminate important data that's sitting on an outlier. The next one is that the large language machines are designed to get close. Large language models are designed to get close in answer. Close may not be good enough, and it certainly isn't good enough in all cases. So the concern is misuse by operators. They assume the AI is correct, but it hasn't really produced the accurate answer. And the last one is that AI actually operates as a black box. We don't understand the algorithms. So you have no real transparency into the decision-making process. And the consequence of that is that you could end up with inaccurate or misleading information, or in some cases, hallucinations. Over to Andy to give you an example of that.
And just to give you, this is a real world example, and there are lots more complicated cases, but before I walk you through this, I think I'll just say, so to me, computers do three things. They either crash, they make you wait, or they give you the right answer. So if you put numbers in a spreadsheet or in an accountancy system, it should always give you the right answer. This is a live case of somebody used images to train AI as a test case to differentiate between a wolf and a husky. So there's
explanation of husky, please.
So a husky is a dog that normally lives in the Arctic, so normally in a snowy environment. So they ran thousands of pictures of wolves and huskies into the system. However, what the AI did was conclude that if a husky is in a snowy environment, it must be a husky. And if it's not in a snowy environment, it must be a wolf. Now, for those of us who are familiar with the difference between a husky and a wolf, we have learned experience. So we know the two are different examples. I could give you crocodile and alligator. I know that they are two different things, but one lives in a swamp, one doesn't. So basically, AI had been trained by a bunch of images. We, as humans, know the difference between the two. The AI had, in most cases, come up with the right answer, but for the wrong reason. So this goes back to my point that we've been used to, for all of my life, computers giving us the right answer. And in your world, you've been used to checking out what humans do because they could have made an error, been stressed, they could be a criminal. Now we get into the world where AI and computers can start to give us the wrong answer. And we call these hallucinations, which, as Simon has made the point just there.
So it raises some very serious questions about how we use AI in organizations. You can assume that the results are intelligently derived, but they could be incorrect or invalid results. That can lead to deterioration in your business intelligence, and it can lead to poor decision making. You end up saying, well, the AI told us to do this, but there was no human validation of the thinking behind that. If that starts to happen and it evolves, you actually replace intelligent decision making with the idea that, well, the AI said no, so staff overly rely on AI to do their jobs, no human validation of what the AI is telling them, and you end up making completely uninformed decision making. And there has been examples of this in recruitment, where the AI is basically selecting candidates. And then finally, and we have seen examples of this in the UK, inputting data to public AI actually results in a loss of confidentiality. If you input data to a public AI, it becomes part of the AI's training data. That means the data is now in the public domain. It cannot be forgotten. You can't take it back out. So the final result there is complete loss of confidentiality. The AI now has your data, and it's being regurgitated in answers to other people's requests on AI. So we have to be very, very careful about how we integrate AI into our systems. Andy.
Did you want to summarize, Simon, or myself?
Yeah, go ahead. I think the idea was you would summarize.
I mean, and just to add to what Simon said there, we started this whole conversation with the first electronic attack with somebody listening to the French stock exchange telegraph system and shorting the market. If I ask AI, should I invest in Tata Steel? That may suggest that I'm about to invest in Tata Steel. So it could create the same economic effect. So to enforce what Simon says there, by asking AI the question may give away knowledge of your organization, your financial position. That knowledge now no longer belongs to you. It's like me going to my local pub or cricket ground or church and asking where is the best place to put my headquarters in Frankfurt. It applies, I'm going to move my headquarters to Frankfurt. So to sum up, this is a big problem. We've said this is the third largest GDP. Most companies don't know how to respond, and as we said, limited understanding of the problem at management level. This is not just a problem of the IT department. Any of you could become victim or tricked, and as Simon kind of pointed out earlier in the slides, the criminals only need to have one lucky day. You need to be lucky all the time, or generate your luck. Solutions are complex to implement, and there's a skill shortage, but hopefully if there's one thing I've given you today, we've both given you today, is some of the core skills that you have in your industry are really applicable to our industry. And those core skills of audit, process, policy, checking, thinking how things could go wrong, and actually knowing where the money goes and understanding the global financial systems, you have a much superior understanding of that than actually the criminals as well as the cyber industry. So you can help us to solve this skill shortage, which is my point there. It's not just an IT issue. This is a team sport. This involves the whole organization. And as I say, whenever I see boards after ransomware, very rarely do I get to speak to the IT director. I'm normally speaking to the CEO and the CFO. So cyber is a management issue, not a technology issue. So if we can do anything to increase our understanding, develop proper governance and risk management processes, and not just totally rely on technology, that's one of our saviors. And as we said all the way through here, and hopefully this point has resonated, 90% of attacks can be stopped by good cyber IT hygiene. If Maersk had a separate backup, not just relied on the luck of the Gambia, they would have been a lot safer. If SolarWinds hadn't had password 123 in their system, that big attack on half of the American government never would have happened. So my experience and Simon's experience, some of these things are quite sometimes comical. You would laugh if it weren't serious, that the amount of cyber crimes that can be really stopped in their tracks just by basic things. And I've used the metaphor already, and we've all lived through COVID, that sometimes the washing your hands, the cyber hygiene is the important point. The equivalent of antibiotics and reaching for technology, that really should be the last resort. But bringing all these things together provides you a homogeneous defense. So that concludes the slides, you'd be pleased to know. And if there's any questions, please fire them through.
So, Simon and Andy, thank you for a fascinating presentation. There are some questions which have come in. We'll open it to the panel here for discussions. But I think if you just stand back, and you sort of highlighted a very interesting point where you talked about a bank and its customers. And Simon, you know, the famous chart, and you have apps. And I think as the world is emerging with different technology providers, there's not one technology solution. Now, if you had a clean sheet of paper today, and you know, just imagine, and we can, and given the technology development, what is happening, would we think about it differently, and would it help us in cybercrime? So we don't have SolarWinds, X, Y, Z, Fortinet, lots of different vendors, different slides. If we do everything under one organization, would it help? That's my question. Let's have some thoughts and comments on that.
It's an interesting view, and actually, when I worked for a very big, you know, Fortune 20 global organization, we had 3,000 IT systems, and at one point, it actually made sense to write one IT system to run the whole organization. Let's think of Microsoft software. If there were 1 billion copies of Microsoft software and 100 million lines of code and 10 vulnerabilities, then the criminals have 1 billion opportunities to go and execute that code. So I think there's some logic there. It goes back to the point that Simon and I have said, that really strong management is important here. So just because you've written your own code doesn't mean it's any better than code that's been tested and used 1 billion times over. So I could write really bad code for my organization, or I can buy really good code from Microsoft. This is a long answer. I think I go back to my don't disengage brain, disengage system. But I like your thought that anybody who has the bravery to start from a clean sheet of paper, you've got a good opportunity to do things differently. And criminals don't like different, because when criminals invent an attack, some attacks can cost some criminals $50,000 to launch, but they can hit 250,000 people an hour. So they get their money back in 10 minutes. That's a good business model. The other thing I'd say is you don't need to be perfect. You need to be better than the guy next door. So it's the great story that I don't need to run faster than the tiger. I just need to run faster than the guy behind me. There's a very simple thing called DMARC, and I won't bore you with what DMARC is. I can impersonate most chief execs of 50% of the businesses on the planet without hacking into their IT system, because they don't have this thing turned on. We can maybe talk about that in a different webinar. There's a way to find out whether you're all in this thing. If you turn that thing on, I won't bore you with the thing. It's an email setting. It tells the internet that you have changed your cyber maturity. And we have done research and evidence that shows the criminals will attack the other people in that 50%. So it's the equivalent of, I can stick a burglar alarm box on the outside of my house. I may not need a burglar alarm. The criminals will go to the house next door without the burglar alarm. So I think if there's one thing I can say here, this is the, I like to call this the lion factor. You know, a lion has a mane and makes itself look bigger than it really is. Anything you can do, and we can give you all tips on this, to make yourself look bigger and harder from a cybersecurity defense point of view than you really are, makes them go to the people next door. Now that's unfortunate for this kind of group, because the people next door will be other people in this group. But yeah, moving the criminals to something more interesting is really the big answer.
I'd like to add to that. There is, if you were to start from scratch, that's tough. Technology evolves, and in fact, a lot of the issues that we see in cybersecurity are because technology evolves, and the speed of evolution has increased and has been increasing over the last 30 years. And therefore, what you tend to do is technology within an organization evolves, and you have older equipment and newer equipment, and it's the legacy that often is where the problems sit. Some organizations, you do say to them, look, it'd be better if you went to a single, as much as possible, a single platform. So for example, the Microsoft house. If you're going to integrate AI into your operations and you're using Microsoft, it makes sense to use Microsoft Copilot, which is their AI agent. Run that within your system, because Microsoft provides security barriers around that operating within your company, and you have you're much more assured of their security posture than if you then go and buy a third party AI from somebody else. So there are benefits of standardizing some of your technology, but the challenge is always going to be that the next new shiny piece of technology comes along and somebody wants it and they integrate it. And the other thing I'll touch on is, especially for the large organizations, you work, the people on this call, you all work within banks. The challenge is large banks, very, very large application sets. And sometimes people are running systems that IT don't know about. It's called shadow IT. And you don't even know you have the system in your company until it's too late and somebody's hacked it. So the challenge, you know, it's a nice idea to think you could get rid of it like that, but I don't see that happening soon.
And you know, the question that hasn't been asked, so the banking industry is very famous for running its own IT. If I was starting up a brand new business today, which I have recently done, I would go all in on cloud. I would go software as a service and all in on cloud. And the reason why is the big cloud providers are spending billions of dollars every year really optimizing their cyber defense. And if Microsoft Cloud goes down, the planet has a really big problem. In fact, the criminals have a really big problem. It's like you wouldn't steal all the oxygen from the planet because we all need to breathe it. You wouldn't shut down the whole internet because we need the internet. Criminals need the internet. So I've seen some banks in the UK starting to move almost entirely to cloud for their production systems. And that was viewed as a bold move. But the view used to be cloud, therefore a third party, back to your question, is less secure. Now the common health view is you are much safer going all into cloud than you are running your own stuff. Simply because, as we said, technologically, this is complicated stuff. But again, we're now in the 20% of the debate, which is technology. The other 80% is, as we proved with the police service of Northern Ireland, you can have the best cyber defense. Somebody calls somebody up and asks for some data and somebody accidentally gave the data to someone. That's more of an audit and compliance issue. But yeah, if I was starting again, which I have done, I would go entirely in cloud.
But that's a fascinating comment, because today the cloud providers are primarily US providers, whether we like it or not.
Yeah.
So, and they come under what's called the US Cloud Act. I think, as you're aware, given what's happening, we're having a firewall Europe coming out who is saying we'll have our own cloud. So I think that the Chinese probably have their own cloud. So
Absolutely.
And they have their own stack. So what we are hypothetically, what we are saying is a cloud is much safer because the cloud provider is spending hundreds of billions of dollars to secure that. But we have the problem here. There's a US cloud company, or new cloud companies in the country going to come up.
Yeah.
And interestingly, India is just starting slowly on this what's called the India stack, which starting with just their own browsers. It's a very interesting development which is just happening. And India is realizing long term they need their whole stack, including the cloud and chip stack.
Yeah, and you are right. You need at least a resilient multiple in-country Indian clouds. And you're right. Since Donald Trump has been elected, at the risk of getting political, the US Cloud Act is starting to scare people. But in the UK, certainly we do have, and in Europe we do have native non-American clouds. But yeah, that's a developing market.
I think on the other side, we talk 80% 20% technology, 80% people. I think it's a very relevant question for people who are on the call, specifically also for Mr. Chatterjee and his colleagues and others who have, we run the cost and management accounting is a big institute with a lot of risk management capabilities in the institute. What are your suggestions? What the institute can do in terms of how do you is there an element of specific training of people which can sort of create more people in the pipeline, the cybersecurity side, both for the audit of that as well as for becoming professionals internally in the company? Just both you are practicing professionals, Simon, you and Andy, it will be very helpful to understand that.
As has been pointed out, we pointed out a lot of the skills on the call around compliance, regulatory compliance, audit capability. You can take that from the financial sector and say, right, we're going to also apply that knowledge to a framework, whether that's, you could apply it to the NIST cybersecurity framework. I'm sure India may already have some of its own cybersecurity frameworks, and use that knowledge of how to effectively audit and hold people accountable against the framework, and create that linkage between the financial audit capability and extend it into the cyber audit capability, and say the two are inseparable, really. I think is something that you could do.
No, I agree. I am confident that you could take either a cybersecurity standard and give it to somebody from this group, or what we call a BCPDR, business continuity and disaster recovery plan, which says this is what you do when a bad thing happens. And that normally leads out to multiple other documents and things, and to say, show me, tell me, experience this. It's all about having an inquiring mind. I think if you've got an inquiring mind and you've got a structured process, the differences between accountancy policies and procedures and cyber policies and procedures, there are a lot of transferable skills there. Clearly, there's a whole new lexicon dialogue to learn for cyber, but I think there's an easy way in there.
Mr. Chatterjee, let's throw it to the group. Any questions from your side before I take some of the questions from the audience?
Yeah. Actually, the questions from the audience, I think already Dibyendu has passed on to you.
Yes. I will
Before
take
that.
questions from your side.
Yeah. I have only one issue to just inform our very erudite panelists. Let us say that our institute has come out with a diploma in system security audit, system security and audit. So this is a cloud computing audit is there, cloud audit. Actually, this is not only system audit, it's a cloud audit is also there. And our this course has been recognized by the Government of India, Ministry of Electronics. SARTIN has recognized this course. And this DISA course is very exhaustive in nature for our professionals. But today's discussions is really a very enriching one for so far as a institute, from the institute point of view. I could understand that a lot of things are to be taken. Actually, one critical question comes to my mind. I just want to put before Mr. Andy and Mr. Simons. As AI empowered tools become increasingly sophisticated, as we understand from your deliberations, how can financial institutions like banks and organizations ensure that their AI-driven systems are not being exploited by cyber criminals to perpetuate financial frauds, such as deepfake-based phishing attacks, as I understood from your some discussions, AI-generated synthetic identities and machine learning-powered malware. So these are questions coming because many webinars, many programs we are attending. So now today's session has become really eye-opener for us. Can you please put up your suggestions or your observations on this, sir?
Yeah, I mean, if I just jump in there quickly, if I've understood the question, I mean, my big recommendation, not just for AI, but for conventional fraud, is switch to another channel. So what I mean by that is, if you're talking to somebody on Google Hangout and they ask you to move $25 million, you confirm that on the phone, you confirm that on email, you confirm that on the text. Any ways you can switch to a different technology, a different media. So if I get an invoice for $10 million on email, I'm going to call the person to verify. I'm going to WhatsApp the person. I'm going to use something that isn't the medium, as in email, the way the thing arrives. So there's a very quick answer. That would, again, we could talk about AI defenses for hours, but if there was one very quick answer, I would say switch to a different technological medium. And in the UK, we have a campaign called Take 5 for fraud, which is literally just that, go make a cup of tea. I know in some transactions, moving $10 million within that instant may be really important, but in many cases, people, especially by criminals, get pressured into making a decision. So anything you can do to buy time into the decision and correlate the decision you're making using a different form of communication will get you 90% of the way there, against AI as well as against conventional fraud.
The other thing I would add is, for the criminals to get the money, they have to change something. They have to change where the money is sent, or they have to set up a payment that isn't part of your normal process. And the first thing I do with large clients, I go in is I say, talk with their head of finance function and say, do you have a process that ensures that if anybody asks anything out of the ordinary, anything beyond your normal expected operations, you take that 5 minutes, you question it, you validate it. You have to think like that. I've seen requests come in from suppliers and say, oh, please update my bank details. They've now changed. That's out of the ordinary. Why have your bank details changed? Back to this point, you've then got to go validate it, and you have to use a different communication channel, not one that's been provided in the email, but a completely different one that you know, to make sure that that's a valid request.
And I think as well, and to kind of round this one out, so Simon and I often joke that he's a lot more paranoid than I am, because he's convinced people are after us all, but a certain measured degree of healthy paranoia. So things like this, things like just talking about this kind of stuff, there's a lot of parallels between cyber and mental health, and people say the more you talk about mental health, the better things are. So not doing cyber training once a year, doing this regularly, having small conversations. The reason why I said the Maersk story is my favorite dinner time conversation or after dinner speech. Making this interesting, but builds a little bit of paranoia, but a healthier degree of paranoia. And that's the kind of thing that you need to just ping that regularly. It's like pinging a pendulum, just to keep it healthy, but also keep it there. It's the day you drop your guard, not just against AI, to your point, but to against conventional fraud. You know, for the timeline I showed you, other than the telegraph interception, because we don't use telegraph anymore, all of those other things are still happening. Criminals are still using attacks that I was being attacked with 20 years ago. So yeah, just keeping it top of mind, but still healthy. In the same way that, you know, you think about diseases, you think about crossing the road safely. There's lots of other ways you keep safe, and you talk to your children about crossing the road. You probably never talk to your children about passwords. Why not? You know, do this, bring it more into day-by-day life, and then you find it becomes not the annual thing, like the annual security audit that is boring and people don't really pay attention to. We have to make it engaging. So more things like this help to get that level of healthy paranoia.
So Andy, interesting you mentioned we don't use the telegram, but I remember at school, I have used the telegram. We used to go and give telegrams.
Yeah.
Yes.
I can still remember some Morse code as well. If it's
Time I've seen telegrams, I've gone to a telegram office, given a telegram, and also, you know, life has fascinatingly changed, but we don't realize.
And you know, there's a serious point there. Ironically, going back to old world communications is actually quite safe. I'm not suggesting we all go and set up a telegraph system, but in some cases, I've said to people, actually writing down the key data to reboot your IT system and putting that in the safe is not a bad suggestion. Because when you realize, and when I do ransomware simulations, everybody is so reliant on their laptops that having a paper-based business continuity plan with the right phone numbers in there is really important. And paper's so yesterday, telegraph is so yesterday, but using anything that the criminals don't normally use is a good defense.
Any other question from this group here, Mr. Chairman?
I have one
Please.
point, sir. Let me at the outset compliment Mr. Andy and Simon both for giving a very good perspective. And having been in the banking industry for almost 5 decades, and I feel so much trust is there around GDPR and DPDP Act on the privacy of data and privacy of the personal information. Uh, how is it that the criminals are still able to breach that when this data is so much, uh, camouflage, well covered? So the second thing which occurs to my mind that while in every institution, because I sit on a couple of boards, we do the phishing simulation and all that, but that kind of a thing cannot happen for the individual. So would you recommend anything that how an individual should be exposed to the phishing simulation so that he learns that what he is doing is not right?
Sorry.
Most of the frauds probably are happening because of the mistakes of an individual who are responding to such things.
Yeah, and the statistics say that 95% of cybercrime starts with a phishing attack. As Simon says, hacking, you know, it was 70% hacking, now moved to 70% phishing. It will evolve. And I have this fundamental passion that the internet was built to do a thing, and it now does a different thing. And the internet, there are some problems that the internet is not fit for purpose, and it's a thing that's part of my PhD work. I guess if I give you some hope there, the internet will evolve to be safer. And so I've got a different set of slides that say, imagine if the water industry was like the internet. We pump dirty water to your house and you have to purify it yourself. That's ridiculous. But the water industry and the power industry have been around for years. The internet is only as old as me. So technologically, we're both still young. So these things are evolving. But I think for the remainder of probably many of our careers, teaching people to be aware of phishing links and that the internet is how it is, I think is a really good first line of defense. There are free tools out there that help to spot phishing links so they don't hit the users, and we can share those kind of things through the community. One is called Quad9. So if you go to www.quad9.net, that's a completely free thing that eliminates a lot of phishing attacks, and it currently protects 250 million people worldwide. So there are a lot more things out there than maybe you would appreciate, because Googling free cybersecurity tools is not clever, because you could find a Russian-made VPN that steals your credentials, or a different nation-made VPN. I think that's a long answer to your question. I'm not sure we answered that there, or anything from Simon to add to that.
One of the challenges you have is that the criminals basically take advantage of complexity. And when I was doing research for my thesis, I was looking at attacks on critical national infrastructure. There's a great quote by one of the founding fathers of the internet who said, when we built it, just trying to get it to work was such a challenge that we weren't focused on security, and we thought it'd be easy because we keep the bad guys out and only good people would use it. And of course, as Andy said, it's evolved into something we never anticipated. Nobody foresaw this, but it was never designed for the purpose that it's now being used. I mean, fundamentally, it was never designed for the purpose it's being used. Technology, the expansion of technology has increased complexity, 1,000-fold. And that's, I'm more pessimistic than Andy. Just we often joke about this, I believe that things are getting worse, and it's going to be very, very hard to make things secure. I think we could actually see increased walled gardens, like you're talking about the India technology stack and the China technology stack, etc. Nations could actually disconnect from the internet and live in their own island, because their own island is, technically speaking, is more secure. They have more control over it.
And actually, to that point, and this is just a thought, so things like the SWIFT network is a classic walled garden internet for moving money. So can we do more with SWIFT? Can we do more with the private networks that already exist? The airline ticketing network has always been a private network for the right reason. So maybe the days of the private networks doing more, so that big network that I used to run for the UK government no longer exists. Again, those kind of things, we're hearing rumours that these kind of things will come back. So I think, a bigger, longer term answer is, in communities like this, banking, critical national infrastructure, etc., private networks that are not reliant on the internet but coexist with the internet is probably a good way forward.
No, but just to add to that, Andy, if you look at the history of the internet, it was set up by DARPA, by the US Department of Defense. Or I remember when I was graduating as an engineer from IIT and Simon at similar time, DARPA had just started. We could communicate from university to university. It so happened at some point it ballooned, and that has morphed into the worldwide internet. And exactly, I think no one foresaw that point in time that we're going to use the same internet for communicating messages and all. It was never meant for such a secure environment of messages. It was meant for academics to sort of exchange research reports. But let's move on. Any other question for you, Mr. Chairman? Sir, any other question from you?
Questions I think have come from Mr. Roy, who has assimilated the questions from the participants.
Let me go through them. I have some questions. Let me go through them.
Yeah, please.
So, Simon, can you just look at some of the questions, just read and see if you want to answer from. Yeah.
Well, there's a comment here from this one, Anchor.
Yeah, just
Anchor Saxena. It says, "Can AI counter AI?" And the short answer is yes. So AI will be a force for good as well as for bad. So much as my concerns are that artificial intelligence can be used to attack an organization. You can also use AI to scan an organization, point out its vulnerabilities, and then use that to make it more secure. And also AI can probably look for patterns. Like, for example, we talked about people trying to set up accounts in a company and siphon out money. AI is probably far faster at identifying that and closing it down. So yes, I think that the short answer is AI will also work as a defensive tool. Andy?
No, agreed. We can come back to that. Let's do another question, but I've got some thoughts to add to that. But yes.
So there's one question which says how experts or financial professionals should navigate to become an AI-enabled professional of today's web with full info what to choose and how to move forward. Any thoughts on that?
Sorry, could you go again with the question?
Yes. Basically, how can people with with the financial or management accounting background move into more of their careers into the AI-enabled world? I think that's the nature of the question.
Yeah. So good question. I would say, are the professional qualifications in AI today? Probably not. Is this something that this kind of organization could think about? Yes. I would personally say, as Simon has touched on, playing with AI, so getting used to Copilot, playing with the wider systems, but with a benign data set. So in other words, learning how to use AI. By the way, we keep talking about AI as one thing. One organization I work with, you put a question into its platform and it will ask the best AI. So there are lots of different AIs. And I love this concept because I wouldn't ask an accountant to do welding and I wouldn't ask a welder to be my accountant. Yeah. Some people are trained as engineers, some people are trained as accountants. Yet we ask AI everything and expect it to be an expert. Different AI models are better at different things. So whether you use Claude, Bard, the Google version, et cetera, et cetera. So I think starting to experiment with different AIs to get used to which one works for you would be my starting recommendation.
Another question here. Is there a nexus between the dark web and cybercrime and what its implications are for cyber? But yes, the dark, and you probably start with the deep net. The deep net or the dark net is everything. So for example, financial data that a bank holds as part of the dark net, it's not available to the public. It's behind a firewall of some kind. So there's a massive amount of data that is quite valid. But there is also something called the dark net, which is not available through the public internet. It's not even available through regular firewalls. It exists on a completely different network. It is a force for good. So journalists often in some countries use it where they're not allowed, they don't have the freedom to report. They'll use the dark net to communicate. But the dark net is very much used by cyber criminals for publishing malicious software for sale, for selling data that they've stolen, etc. So yeah, there absolutely is a very, very close linkage between the dark net and and cybercrime. And just as an example, they reckon that the complete internet with all of the publicly available information represents less than 5% of all of the information out there that's hidden. So I think for every 1 megabyte of data that's available on the internet, there's another 20 megabytes of data that's hidden that you cannot see.
I think just to build on that, famously, a 15-year-old boy in Northern Ireland took down a UK telco about 20 years ago. The days when a boy in his bedroom can take down a telecoms company are gone. And so criminals now work as organized gangs, and they use the dark web as their equivalent of email to be able to communicate. So there are money mules, hackers, interceptors, and they work as serious and organized crime. So that helps to answer the question.
Yeah. Simon, anything?
Just Andy, is there a mechanism for reverse tracking to find out the modus operandi of a cybercrime? How do people go about that? What is the sort of forensic approach to identifying?
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, touching on the dark web, I professionally use dark web tools to monitor a likelihood of a gang attacking an organization. So one gang I wrestled with is called the Cuban ransomware gang, and they have a particular modus operandi. So different gangs have they're called TTPs, techniques and protocols to attack. So different people have different signatures, just in the way that different gangs have different signatures and different ways of working. So when we knew we were being attacked by the Cuban ransomware gang, we knew their next move would be this. Whereas if you know you're going to be attacked by Lockbit, their preference is to go and use ransomware as a service. And so the whole load of different attack vectors, which different people use. Again, using a military analogy, certain countries prefer certain weaponry versus others. The surprise is always the thing. So assuming the Cuban ransomware gang would always do this is 90% accurate, but they can always use the element of surprise and do something different. But yeah, absolutely. When you get hit with a virus or a ransomware, you're probably not the first person to be hit. So there's a concept called threat intelligence, which is where we in the community all share these attacks, these patterns. We share where the IP addresses are coming from, which countries it's coming from. So one of the challenges and the reason why cyber criminals are so successful is when you're a victim of cybercrime, the first thing you don't think to do is go and tell everybody. In fact, almost the last thing you do is tell everybody I've just become a victim of cybercrime, because it could feel shameful. It's like admitting that you've done something wrong. The sooner you can get that data to law enforcement or the other people in the community where maybe I used to work, to be able to tell people in the cybersecurity industry that this attack is coming from this IP address, the sooner that can be stopped in its tracks. So we call that a 0 day. So 0 day is when the first thing happens, and then people find an antidote or a patch to that. And that will take probably 48 hours. So yes, long answer to your question. When you get hit by a 0 day, if nobody else has heard about it, it goes to a malware lab. Somebody does the analysis. Somebody can then work out how the virus works, where it's being controlled by. The technique is called a C2, so a command and control domain. Most viruses are a bit like a guided missile. They're being controlled by a criminal in a bunker somewhere, and being able to see that communication and shut it down eliminates it. That was a very long answer to the question, but hopefully that's
one more last question before we wrap up. Okay,
it's a very good one, very pointed. In terms of cyber threat, is Europe more prone? Is the banking industry in Europe more prone or more at risk than the Indian banking system?
Or the US, whatever.
Or the US, or any, it's a good question.
I'm going to twist the question a bit. I'm so keen to say yes, because criminals follow the money, but where the money is. So a bank, which I shall not mention, spends $286 million a year just on their cyber defense run state. And then they have new projects, which are another 280 million. So is the European banking industry more attacked than the Indian market? Potentially. But if the criminals think that the Indian banking system isn't as well defended as the European system, they will go after the Indian system. So there's this lovely juxtaposition that if I've got $100 trillion in the bank, but I spend $1 trillion defending myself, would a criminal go after me, or would he go after somebody who's got $10 million but has spent $10,000 defending themselves? The latter target is arguably weaker, but a less attractive amount. One thing I will spin all the way back to my slides is saying stealing data on customers is more important. If I can steal all of the data of all of the customers of Lloyds Bank in the UK, I then have 12 million access to 12 million bank accounts. I can steal a lot more money and be not detected by doing that than I can to try and steal all the money out of Lloyds Bank. So when you say attack, I think attacking the data in the banks is actually more important for the criminals than attacking the money. We are seeing very few examples of large sums of money being stolen from banks. We are seeing organizations be ransomwared and data be stolen so you can attack the customers, which is kind of my societal effect, that if I'm a bank and I have 12 million customers, the criminals are more likely now to attack my customers, me, than they are to attack the bank, because the bank is now like a fortress.
The only thing I was going to add to that, Andy, was, and I don't know if there's any evidence for this, but if you're going to attack an organization, most of the criminals will speak English, because they'll go after English-speaking organizations because they can find the documentation in English.
Yep.
It's possibly harder to attack an organization where the language spoken is not English, simply because once they get in and they look at stuff, they have to translate it all to understand what they're looking at.
Yeah.
I don't know how much that impacts what gets hit and what doesn't.
Yeah, and this is a global problem. And I know the chairman wants to say something, so I'll be very quick about this. every day, if you were to look on your firewall or your routers, you probably get scanned about 100 times. Once is the University of Michigan, which is doing a research project on the whole of the internet. The other 99 times are criminals from everywhere on the planet scanning every IP address they can to find a vulnerability. So, I said the Maersk attack was accidental. Sometimes the criminals do put a lot of thinking into big attacks, but sometimes they're just looking for an opportunity. It's like if you leave your wallet in the streets, it will get stolen. They are constantly looking for the equivalent, no matter where you are, what language you speak, to get in and then do something. But as Simon says, most software is written in America or written in English. Therefore, we have a common business language, a common software language. Unfortunately, that gives us a common attack language. But yeah, it's a good point.
No, so just to add to that, I think maybe the Indian angle of India, all standard, most banks will be in English. The software will also be in English. But I think the only thing could be Indian rupee is not freely movable across the world.
Yeah.
That could be one of the reasons which gives a bit more security. But coming back to your societal point, is we don't know.
Yep.
Because that's where, as you said, if $10 is going every month, most people would not be able to detect from their bank statements. Specifically as you are going to the 50, 60-year-old who still do not depend on paper statements. It's impossible. But I think let's end there. I think it has been a fascinating conversation. Mr. Chatterjee, you have a point.
Yeah.
Back to you.
Yeah, actually, after listening to Mr. Andy and Mr. Simon, again, continuous questions are coming. But I just want to not have questions. I will be putting some of the facts which is happening in India, because you must know it, that how we are combating the situations. First of all, Reserve Bank of India is doing an yeoman service for this particular issue on this special protection for the citizens in the banking industry. Let me tell you, every day in every phone, whenever we will be calling someone, one phone, every phone will be first addressed by, you have to be caution, you are giving caution that you don't take up any calls which is fraudulent calls, you don't go for any phishing attack, you don't put anything from any from foreign countries call. So every day 142 million crores people, they are getting the call, and they are getting this caution from the Reserve Bank of India's, this is it has been such a beautifully way. Now we are all habituated to that, number one. Number two, we have got a beautiful experience of OTP. Without OTP, we can't proceed further. And that's a magnificent, system, Reserve Bank of India. That's why we could actually restrict many of the frauds in this country. So salute to our Reserve Bank of India's, Central Bank of India's continuous way of, protection of the countries. And we are listening from you. And definitely this AI issue has been taken care of by our regulators. But definitely we must say that today's is an eye-opener for us, how our professionals should much accelerate their skill and capacity building for this particular AI world. So I am sure AI can never take the human intelligence. Human intelligence will be remaining same. It will be much better than AI, because today we people are have invented AI, but AI cannot grab our all sort of efficiencies. So, sir, here really beautiful program. I am thankful to Mr. Andy, Mr. Simon, and special thanks to our own CMA, our CMA Udayan Guha, for having such a beautiful moderation of the program. I leave this studio to CMA Dibyendu Roy, our HOD, whose effort has paved the way for this program today. I request Dibyendu to give his vote of thanks formally from the Institute of Cost Accountants of India to our learned speakers and moderators.
Thank you, sir. As you have already said, today's event was an eventful one, and we thank Mr. Andy Bates and Mr. Simon Mitchell, and always means we are thankful to Udayan sir, who has always bridged the gap between UK and India. And today's topic, we have covered that cyber threats and financial frauds in the digital age, strengthening cyber resilience in BFSI and beyond. We thank our advisor, who is also from a regulator. He was former CGM of RBI, CMA Partha Choudhury, for giving the opening address, and our icon of the profession, CMA Mohan Tangsale sir, for sharing his thoughts today. And our chairman always is exuberant to make this dinner possible. He did a lot of activities beyond the curtains, And we also thank our BFSI board members, our president, vice president, and also our IT department, our CPT department, and our team members, especially Indrakshi and Shantanu, for making this webinar the light of the day. And we thank everybody at the nick of time at 6 Indian Standard Time. We are closing today's session. Thank you all for making this event a wonderful one. Thank you.
Thank you. All the best. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
One photo, please. One photo, right? Complete.
No, one photo. You're taking the photo. Andy,
Yeah.
are you back?
I think it has been taken. Dipendu, you have taken photo? Yes.
I have taken on